welcome aboard. You're listening to Flight Plan Quick Consults, your go-to podcast for veterinary insights that are fast focused and designed to elevate your practice. I'm your host, Brenda Tassova Medina from Encore Veterinary Consulting. So whether you're between appointments or heading off into strategy session, we've got takeoff ready tips, tools, and takeaways to keep your team soaring. So buckle up and let's chart today's course to monitoring practice vital signs. Today's panel includes Debbie Hill, Tiffany Consalvo, and Ben Spinks. Debbie, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm willing to do just about anything for management, as evidenced by that. I was in private practice for 30 plus years, 35 years, just retired a couple months ago and found out that that's a little bit boring. So I'm happy now to be doing some consulting. I've done some curriculum writing. I spoke at the annual VHMA conference. So pretty much gone free agent. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. Tiffany, you're next up.
Sure. So I'm Tiffany Consalvo. I've been in this industry over 20 years now. It's a long time, but I started off at small animal practice in GP and was able to telemanage that practice in 2008, which was very different than it is now. So that was a physical fax machine. It was snail mail for payroll, all the fun stuff. It was a great learning experience. I think Brenda gave me some tips when I got started doing that. So that was great. I spent 12 years, bulk of my career as a hospital administrator, partnered with a great team owners, and we were able to take that from a small practice onto a whole renovated space. So that was a really fun project. We spent 12 years together and sold that practice in 2021. And since then, I've done speaking, consulting, you name it, website development, you know, a lot of other things within the industry. Recently speaking with the VHMA for a finance course. So this topic is a good one for me.
Excellent. And last but certainly not least is Ben Spinks.
Yeah, thanks, Brenda. I kind of split my time a few different ways. Home base for me is a companion animal practice in Ohio that I co-own. My partners are on the medical side of things, and I'm more focused on the business side of things. We have the traditional GP practice, we have a pet resort, and we're currently building a referral veterinary surgery and dental center all on the same campus. And then the other main thing I focus on is Vetios. So that's a video production company that focuses on the veterinary vertical, and we're based out of Colorado.
Awesome. Let's start with Tiffany. Tiffany, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what are the 5 vital signs that tell you if your practice is truly healthy.
Yeah, I love that question. I wish I could have like 10 because I like about 10 KPIs, but I will say my top are going to be percentage of revenue that we are spending in our COGS. And so if I look at that, I can tell if we've got 20% or lower in COGS is going to tell me if we have a healthy inventory system going on. I'm also going to look at staff labor as a percentage of revenue. So if I don't know anything about your practice, but I'm able to see those two, I can kind of tell, do we have too many staff in the building or do we have not enough revenue to cover those staff? So I like those 2 KPIs. I would love to see percentage of revenue for DVMs as well, because I think that tells me a good story on whether or not we have productive doctors. Then if I'm looking at it from a consulting standpoint, I want to say service mix, because I want to know, do we have a 80-20 split for services to product ratio for my GP side? And then if I'm looking at ER specialty, I'm probably going to say, is it 90-10 or 95-5? Because they're going to have a little bit different service mix, but that can give me a really good idea of like the quality of medicine, or if we have discounting issues going on or a lack of revenue going on. And then I want to see cash flow. So do we have cash in the bank that is, is that a trouble factor or not a trouble factor for the practice? Because I think that can give me a really good tell of how that practice is going with those 5 things. If I get to have other items, I might pick a few others on there too that I think are just as important. But those would be my top 5.
Awesome. Debbie, what about you?
Well, like Tiffany, I like to know that service product mix. A few years back, Denise Tumlin mentioned that at a conference I was at, and I thought, okay, that tells me something. It tells me if we're just selling stuff or are we actually getting compliance on our recommended medical care. So that's one of my big ones. If I'm not seeing at least 80-20, I'm a little worried. And I look at a trend for that because sometimes it's just an odd month. but I find that one important. I also like revenue by staff hours. I want to know, I hear a lot of grousing about staff. Either we have too much and they're sitting around, or we don't have enough and we're all drastically, panicking. But the reality is, are they able to offer the services that my doctors want and get compliance with that? When I'm looking at that trend, I want to see, has somebody gone rogue or has some training kicked in? I really like that, and it's easy to just look at gross and miss these little snags. I like annual revenue per patient. I think that our patient revenue is more than just a one-time emergency visit. And I want to see, are we getting that wellness care in? Or are we just dependent in a private practice on, everybody can't have pancreatitis. Like you've got to have something ongoing. Uh, I like COGS as well. I think sometimes we set that goal really low. I see some managers that have got what I believe to be an unrealistic goal and they shoot for it. But what that does is puts pressure on the inventory person to trim out the orders. And then there's not enough supplies. And then the doctors are mad because there's never any, fill in the blank. I like at least a 20% COGS. Clearly, if I'm hitting 25, I need to go talk to somebody about how many different products, for vomiting cat we can have on the shelf. And then my last is I really like to look at lab production by individual doctor. My most productive doctors run at least 25% labs with several hitting over 30. And I see these doctors provide me with really good numbers. And contrary to our belief, it doesn't feel salesy. Clients love them. So I think that these are a good indicator for me if I kind of see, well, where are we going? It certainly sets some nice tracks for what kind of recommendations I can make to help them improve.
Awesome. How about you, Ben? What are the five things you
Ooh,
hone in
this
on?
is such an interesting discussion, and yeah, I certainly don't disagree with anything Tiffany or Debbie said, but the fact that there is differences there, I guess if I zoom out maybe a little bit, it would just be whatever the five things are. The important things that, maybe that's not a universal five things. It's the five things that matter at your practice.
Right.
And I know for us, in my practice over the years, that focus has shifted, depending on what we're prioritizing or depending where we feel like we need to focus our attention. Also, kind of maybe taking a little bit different approach. When it comes to human biology, you might have, okay, you have the circulatory system, you have the respiratory system, you have the neurologic systems. There's a lot of different things that could go into each of those. For me, if we look at maybe a little bit broader scope, I think metrics around team stability, engagement, and behavior are going to be important. That could be engagement surveys, psychological safety, eNPS scores, so something in that realm. Client trust and behavior, I think, would be another bigger bucket potentially. So we're thinking, that could include things like compliance and forward booking rates. It also could, be client survey results, online reviews, things along those lines. Touching on what, yeah, was already mentioned, staffing and operational efficiency, I think is hugely important. So staff to doctor ratios, revenue per staff hour, anything in that realm. And probably the other, big one, and this is probably the broadest, and historically the ones I gravitate to probably the most are just the financial health, which a lot of those were already mentioned. So whether it be top line revenue or EBITDA, COGS, looking at DVM by DVM, category analysis, all those could be, critically important depending on what the practice is kind of trying to accomplish. And at the end of the day, it's just not only what they want to prioritize on, but what data is going to actually be something they'll take action on, because I certainly, speaking for myself, have had lots of dashboards and data over the years, and that's great, and I love the way it looks. But if we're not using that to actually make decisions, it's just a lot of noise and not always beneficial.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I think that leads into like what do we do with these numbers? And
Hmm.
I think like my very favorite KPI, I don't think I heard anybody say it, but it's the revenue per unique patient on
Hmm.
a trend line year over year.
Yeah.
That just tells such a fascinating story in terms of what's happening in the practice. Have they had turnover? Are they communicating well? What's the staff training like? Are clients accepting our recommendations? And I think that if we look at things on a trend line, then we can actually see what's happening over time. And that may be something that sometimes we forget to do. It's like just spot checking numbers versus mapping it out.
Yeah, I think you saying that, Brenda, is huge year over year data. I would love to see because that really gives me a lot of insights. If I have these KPIs and I don't have the year over year data, it's like it could tell a very different story. And I think about the pandemic and all of the numbers and how that changed our year over year data and then new doctors or things like that. So that can really paint the picture, having that too.
I agree with Tiffany. I think often what I see is people measure this stuff and we get, well, we're a little better now, but for several years, everything was about the benchmark and we're big on the benchmark. It's like, well, are you benchmarking to see what you're doing better or worse than your own practice? And then look to say, did we um, add or lose a doctor? Did we add or lose a key player in the front that's booking the appointments? So I think knowing that year over year trend and looking back makes a big difference when you're setting the goals for the next year.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to ask a big red hot topic question to get everybody's insights and opinions on. And there are no right or wrong answers here. But I've just heard a lot of discussion around this over the last 6 to 12 months. And the question is, should practices be moving back to the 20-minute exam? And what's the real impact here? Let's start with Debbie.
I like to go first because then poor Ben is stuck with whatever's left over, right? I think the time for the 20-minute exam is past. I think clients want veterinary care that feels like you're taking special time with their special pet. I'm seeing a couple of states getting on board with making pets as part of the family, and which is, been coming for years, but that's definitely something we need to consider. It cannot be transactional anymore. And I think the veterinary teams feel like that 20-minute goal is transactional and unrealistic. Our teams tend to see that as just pushing for the dollar instead of going in and having some time. Now, on the flip side of that, it can't take all day, right? I am not a fan of the 45-minute appointment. You're just killing time. And the 30 minutes seems to make the team think that the doctor needs 30 minutes. And I think we need to go back and set those tech and CSR expectations to say, here's your part. You get, X number of minutes and then move it along. For the doctor to be out in the lab just waiting for the tech to finish their part is ridiculous. And I've seen that over and over the years. But, the goal is that you've got enough time and it feels relaxed enough that you get to know Rusty and not just patient number 3259, but not so much that our busy clients have got their whole day, you know, sucked up into at what should have been 20 minutes and is now an hour. So I think 30 minutes feels better to me.
Okay. Ben, what are your thoughts on this?
I I think where I'm at is more of a hybrid approach, and this is certainly through the lens of my practice, but also talking to a lot of others. At the end of the day, what really matters is the client experience, and how much time is quality time with the doctor, because or nurse, depending on the type of appointment. But thinking about the last time I went to my primary care, for my health, she spent a lot of time, typing on the computer and looking for things and not really focused on the conversation. There was a lot of busy work involved. In contrast, it's like if we can leverage some of the new tools out there, if we're using AI transcription or if we have, in the room scribes, there's a variety of ways to approach that. But I think that if doctors could have, 10 or 15 minutes with really, really focused attention on the pet and the client and engage with them, you know, that's what really matters from the client's perspective. So I think that allowing doctors to kind of find the right path for themselves, and obviously helping them be efficient, instead of saying, hey, we're all going to do 30s or we're all going to do 20s, seems to be a better fit for us. Also, you have some variability on the type of appointment. So I know a lot of practices are moving in that direction where, okay, a new client or new patient appointment is going to look like this versus just a booster versus a sick appointment. So I think having your systems built out so that you can have some variability and flexibility makes a lot of sense right now. But I do never want to lose sight of, hey, we're trying to be efficient, and I don't want that longer appointment time just to be a crutch for efficiency issues behind the scenes. Is that a 30-minute appointment because it's taking a long time to get the labs done or the meds, or it's because the doctor steps out of the room and then types up notes before going into the next one. So I think as long as that time's really being utilized uh, to support the client experience, I think either could be successful, but I do think we really need to focus on efficiency. And again, that's just my experience, but we've had a lot of opportunity for improvement there, I think.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point around the quality time the doctor spends in there. And when you think about how much time is booked, you really have to look at staff to doctor ratio and how we're using our staff, right? So if you are a practice that has a 2-to-1 staff to doctor ratio, the doctor is going to have to, by default, do a lot of that appointment, which is number one, inefficient, leads to them doing more things that they need than they need to be doing, and it limits their ability to see patients. So, leveraging team members and the tools that you talked about can lead to more efficient appointments and the doctor being able to move on to another one. Tiffany, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting question. I don't think I'm kind of with Ben. I don't know that it's a one size fits all where we go back to 20-minute appointments. And I don't know that I would go into a practice and be like, hey, the solve for your practice is to go to 20-minute appointments and you will be fixed, right? But I do think the efficiency is huge. So if I'm going into a practice and I see gaps in the schedule, or I see like maybe they have too many appointments on the books and they don't know where to put anything, then we may optimize schedule or look at a time study and say, okay, how long does it take you to get a client into a room? How much time does it take for your technicians to load the history? How much time does the doctor spend in there? How much time for checkout? And look at the total experience and see if we could get some benchmarks for the hospital around, these different types of exams, and then optimize from there. So maybe there is ability to shave time off of your exam. I don't know that 20 minutes has to be the ultimate, has to be 20-minute appointment, but I do think optimizing with AI, optimizing with some kind of form before you get to the practice to get some intake information so that you can spend that quality time with the doctor or the team. I also think communication plays a huge role into it, right? So if you have a doctor technician team or a hospital team that doesn't know how to communicate effectively with their clients, that experience either goes from a really good one or a really negative experience. And so I feel like making sure that you've got communication training on board, you've optimized your own schedule for what is best for your team. And maybe that means eliminating some of those big ass breaks in the middle. Like maybe that means like taking off, some of the way that you're scheduling, illness to wellness type of thing. Maybe there's some optimization there that could really fix things. I don't know if I would just come in and say, we got to go back to 20-minute exams. So I think there's opportunity there.
Well, and I think Tiffany touched on something, as did Ben, with the doctor communication. I think if our team has got a little bit of training in recognizing the client's needs, because just to have one thing go in here, say this thing to the busy client that's just wanting to get in and get out, they don't want that 45-minute relationship buildup. They want to know that you care and that you understand Lonergan's a special boy, but they don't want to sit there all day. And then the other hand is you've got retired people that you're their social outing for the month, and they want to come and make sure that you remember them and that they remember all the history of the practice. And so there has to be some recognition of the client's communication and personality styles and their history, and that the staff is trained to know how to shift when the need be. That's kind of my take. To give them a slap 20 minutes, I don't think that that's going to happen, but I also don't think it works to give them a slap 30 or 40 or whatever. Like there needs to be some kind of guideline that's functionally effective while still making it feel like I'm just here for you, Mr. Reynolds, whatever we want to talk about. Oh, and not look at the watch while you're doing it.
I also think the purpose, right? It depends on the purpose of your hospital. So I've seen very efficient hospitals that run 15-minute appointments all day long. They're very high producing, and the clients are happy with what they're getting from that practice, and they're happy with the price of it. So I also think there's an ability to go less than, and some other people might be thinking, you are crazy. But not every practice wants high touch in the same way. And so I think understanding the purpose of the practice, why you're there, what your differentiators are, can also be really valuable. So you can lean into that and then attract the clients that want that same thing. And so that might also be part of it.
Yeah.
think making sure to measure that client perception is going to be important too. So if practices are leaning towards shorter appointments or pushing the envelope a little bit, I think it's super important for them to have post-visit surveying set up, and framing questions that are going to solicit those types of answers. So, hey, if I've got a doctor doing 20-minute appointments, but I'm seeing client feedback that says, Dr. Smith, answered all my questions and I didn't feel rushed, I'm going to feel really good about that, and that I think really helps ensure that, our perception of the client's experience is aligning with what they actually experienced.
When I think going back to Brenda's original comment on there's a lot of talk about the 20-minute, I think practices read this and think, okay, we must shift our whole, you know, way of doing things. When to Tiffany's night, there's a perfectly good market for shorter appointments, longer appointments. You need to know what your staff feels right, what your clients feel right by surveys, and also the ability to just read a client in the minute and think they usually like a lot of time, but they're kind of antsy. I need to wrap it up a little bit. So I think there's, we read one number and think that's what we've got to shoot for without any thought on whether those 30 minutes are successful or 20 minutes or 15 minutes are successful for the practice. So I am a big lover of benchmarks, but I also think that there's some customization that needs to happen in every practice before you just jump on a new plan.
I think the biggest differentiator we've seen in the past year is the AI scribe, the digital
Mhm.
scribe. And I think a big reason that practice has shifted from 20 minutes to 30 or even longer appointments was the amount of work that the doctor was putting into doing their medical records, right? And now with digital AI in place, I'm seeing teams finish appointments and go, wait a minute, we're done. Now
Yeah,
what? You
yeah.
know? And so I think when you find yourself in that situation, you should be asking yourself, do we have the right length of appointments?
Mhm.
And move towards, the purpose that you're there, which is serving your patients, because you don't want to limit that either.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for being here today, and thank you to our audience for flying with us on Flight Plan Quick Consults. If today's insights helped you climb to new heights, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your crew. Until next time, keep your mission clear, your team aligned, and your practice soaring.